Living with a disability doesn't mean you're asexual, period. And if that statement surprised you, then stick around. You're in for one hell of an eye-opener. Hey babe, Dr. Catalina here, your favorite intimacy doc. And today we're busting myths around taking names. This video is for everyone. Whether you're living with a disability, loving someone who is, or want to be a kick-ass ally. Let's dive in. And hey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to keep the sexy conversation going. I do think it's not talked about enough, and there's just so many common misconceptions about people living with disabilities or after chronic illness having any disabilities from that, and sex. And the main assumption is that sex isn't important, that sex isn't a priority. Particularly amongst individuals who are born with genetic disabilities, there's a persistent and harmful prejudice that these individuals just should not even engage in sexual activities, and eugenic ideologies that suggest that these individuals shouldn't reproduce. We know that this is a big myth. And we know that with appropriate, tailored support and education, people with disabilities can have healthy, consensual sexual relationships that they desire and deserve. Sex ed already isn't great for able-bodied individuals, and unfortunately, it's even more dire for individuals with disabilities. There's only currently 5 states that require explicitly tailored sex ed curricula to be adapted for students with disabilities. Even in those states, the implementation as well as the quality very much varies. And so, unfortunately, that, and along with a lot of the stigma, the misassumptions, the biases and prejudices, unfortunately a big barrier, particularly in providing sex ed when kids are growing up, is overprotective parents, and them often unintentionally becoming barriers because they don't think that their kids are ready. A 2021 study found that about 61% of parents of children with disabilities thought that their child wasn't ready for sex ed, compared to only 35% of parents of non-disabled children. We know that sex ed should start pre-adolescence, and that's already really hard to do in schools, and particularly encouraging parents to have these conversations at home. Again, I do think it is from a protective lens that unfortunately contributes and exacerbates these stigmas and prejudices that people have amongst individuals living with disabilities, particularly when these disabilities are visible. And I think that it's important to appreciate the differences between that, because oftentimes it's individuals living with learning disabilities or who are neurodivergent individuals who often also don't get tailored education and often feel socially isolated and have difficulties forming relationships and feeling othered, which then impacts their sexual health and relational health throughout their life. The biggest thing I would tell parents is to not make the assumption that your child isn't a sexual being and that they don't have sexual desires or that they're uninterested or asexual. Studies show that individuals with disabilities show that they have sexual desires and aspirations similar to those of non-disabled individuals. The rates are the same. And so I think the first thing is educating patients to view their child as a sexual being. And in doing that, nurturing their own fears. Again, nurturing that protectiveness that they have. I think of them being chastised or being rejected and honoring that, and also preparing them for it. Having those conversations. And the number one reason parents and teachers don't have these conversations is because they don't know how. They don't know how to broach the conversation, how to do it in an open, process-oriented, supportive way. And now there's more resources on that for both parents, for teachers, for healthcare providers. There are more resources, so you don't have to do it alone. But I think that the first thing I always encourage parents is really to see their child as a whole being. And sexuality is central to our well-being and central to our health. For parents, there are a lot of resources. A lot of them are online, and they are web-based programs as well as videos you can watch. The ARC Center for Future Planning Sexuality Education Resources provides tailored help to parents and caregivers with kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities to really support them in having these conversations. The SICUS, the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States, has a lot of resources for parents, for educators, for healthcare providers, and for individuals living with disabilities. And one of the things that we're seeing, which I'm super happy about, is more education for individuals and adolescents and young adolescents to really empower them to embrace their sexuality. The Sexuality and Disability Consortium, which was started in 2018, offers workshops, counseling, and educational resources specifically for people with disabilities. And there's over 15,000 people who've actually been served by this. So they're having broad reach. Planned Parenthood also has programs where a lot of them started in Oregon, and now you can go to your Planned Parenthood and speak with somebody if you're a parent or you're an individual living with a disability, and they can give you tailored information because they've done a lot of inclusive programs. And so I do think that there are more concrete things. I'm currently working on a book that is specifically going to be talking about this, and you're seeing more and more individuals who are speaking up and advocating for sexual health and well-being for everyone. This is an equity concern. We need to make this equitable. Unfortunately, a 2022 study from the National Center for Health Statistics found that women with disabilities are more likely to experience sexual violence, with rates 83% higher than their non-disabled counterparts, while men more struggle with societal expectations around masculinity and sexual performance, which can lead to underreporting of sexual difficulties and social withdrawal. Particularly women with disabilities are 4 times more likely to experience sexual assault. And so I think that when we look at sexuality and we look at the impact of these inequities, it's important to understand the nuances when we talk about those gender differences and how they present, as well as how we can intervene. Because the biggest thing that happens with women is that there's just not consent. And they're not protected. And so we just see higher rates, and the rates that we have probably underestimations, because unfortunately a lot of individuals, just like any sexual assault survivor, may not report their experience. There's been some research around this, but yes, similar to sexual assault amongst non-disabled individuals, oftentimes these are with people who they know. And so they're often repetitive, particularly when we look at younger and adolescent sexual assault. So it often is with caregivers or people who are within their circles, and obviously taking advantage of individuals who have limited capacity to assert themselves, and very much taking that for granted. And I think that this is a conversation that, we just don't talk about enough, and how awful that is. I think one thing that we don't talk about enough is how children are understanding their bodies as they change, as they evolve, particularly individuals who have physical disabilities. Self-image and body image is so important, and empowering children to actually honor their body, and through that teaching them consent, teaching them enthusiastic consent, and encouraging them to embrace their bodies and understand how their bodies experience sensations as they continue to develop, and how that's connected to relationship. There's so many opportunities here to embrace the whole body rather than quarantine or compartmentalize it. That's the biggest conversation that I think that parents need to have with all able-bodied and disabled-bodied children is rejection is a part of life, and building that resilience and encouraging kids and teaching them giving them the skills to not internalize that, for them to develop their identity wholly through themselves, and for them to find their identity, their worth not based on others. Sexuality is so transactional, and it is very much in too many cultures seen as transaction and a matter of someone's worth. And I think that that's such an opportunity to actually, from an early age, empower children to not see sex as that and their sexuality, but to honor it, embrace it.